Eliphalet Duncan was an odd sort of chap. He had a name that sounded like it belonged in a dusty old book, but he wore jeans and t-shirts like everyone else. His father was Scottish, his mother was from Salem. This mix gave him a unique perspective on life, and on death, as it turned out. Eli, as his friends called him, worked as a librarian. He loved the smell of old books and the stories they held, but he never expected to become part of a story himself. Not one like this, anyway.
It all started with a letter. A thick, cream-colored envelope arrived one Tuesday morning. The letter was from a lawyer in Salem. It informed Eli that he had inherited a house. Not just any house, mind you. It was his great-aunt Prudence's house, the one on Gallows Hill. Eli had heard stories about that house, whispered tales at family gatherings, but he'd never been there. Eli sat at his kitchen table, staring at the letter. He didn't know what to think. A house in Salem, on Gallows Hill no less. It sounded like the beginning of a horror movie. But Eli wasn't the type to believe in ghosts. At least that's what he told himself. Little did he know his beliefs were about to be put to the test.
The house loomed before him, a dark silhouette against the twilight sky. Eli stood at the wrought iron gate, key in hand. The house was old, very old. Its windows were like hollow eyes staring down at him. The paint was peeling, revealing the weathered wood beneath. It looked tired, as if it had seen too much.
Eli pushed open the gate. It creaked loudly, breaking the eerie silence. He walked up the overgrown path, each step feeling heavier than the last. The porch groaned under his weight. He half expected the floorboards to give way, but they held firm. They'd been holding for centuries, after all. The key slid into the lock with a satisfying click. Eli hesitated for a moment. He could still turn back, go to a hotel, come back in the daylight. But curiosity got the better of him. He turned the key. The door swung open with a long, low moan, as if the house itself was sighing. Eli stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and the musty smell of age. He fumbled for a light switch. Click. Nothing happened. Of course not. He pulled out his phone, using its flashlight to look around. The beam of light revealed cobwebs, antique furniture, and walls lined with faded portraits. Their eyes seemed to follow him as he moved. Eli shivered. It was going to be a long night.
As Eli explored the house, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the floorboards made him jump. Every shadow seemed to move. He tried to rationalize it. Old houses make noises, it's natural. But there was something else, a heaviness in the air, a sense of history.
In the study, Eli found a leather-bound book. It was a journal, written by his great-aunt Prudence. He sat in a dusty armchair and began to read. The journal spoke of the house's history. It had been built in 1692, the year of the Salem witch trials. The original owner had been a judge, a man named Hathorne. Prudence wrote about the rumors, how Hathorne had condemned innocent women to death, how their spirits were said to haunt the house. But there was more. She wrote of two ghosts in particular, rivals in life, rivals in death. Their names were Elizabeth and Sarah, both accused of witchcraft, both hanged on the same day. Eli closed the journal, his mind reeling. He'd always thought the Salem witch trials were just a dark chapter in history, something to be studied, not experienced. But sitting in this house, surrounded by its history, he felt different, as if the past was reaching out to him, trying to tell him something, and then, as if on cue, he heard it. A whisper, so faint he almost missed it. "Help us."
His voice echoed through the empty house. No response. He must have imagined it. Too many ghost stories, he told himself. But then he felt it. A chill that went straight to his bones. The temperature in the room plummeted. And then he saw her. A figure, translucent and shimmering. She stood by the window looking out. Her clothes were old-fashioned, 17th century. She turned to face him. Her eyes were sad, mournful. Eliphalet Duncan, as Eli. "Elizabeth?" Eli whispered. The ghost nodded. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Suddenly, another figure appeared, this one by the fireplace. She looked angry. Her form flickered like a candle flame. Eliphalet Duncan, as Eli. "Sarah," Eli breathed. The two ghosts faced each other. The air crackled with tension. Eli could feel their hatred, their rivalry. It was palpable. Elizabeth moved towards Eli, her hand outstretched, but Sarah was faster. She appeared between them, her form growing larger, more menacing. Eli stumbled backward, his heart pounding. This was real, too real. He wanted to run, to escape. but something held him there, a sense of duty, of responsibility. These were his ancestors in a way, and they needed his help. Eli took a deep breath. He had to stay calm. Eliphalet Duncan as Eli. "What do you want?" he asked. The ghosts looked at him, then at each other. They seemed surprised he could see them. Elizabeth pointed to a chess set on a side table. Sarah nodded. Eli understood. They wanted to play. He set up the board, his hands shaking slightly. Elizabeth took white, Sarah black. The game began. Eli watched in fascination as the pieces moved on their own. The ghosts were evenly matched. Each move was calculated, precise. The game went on for hours, or was it minutes? Time seemed to lose meaning. As the game progressed, Eli noticed something. The ghosts were changing. Their forms became clearer, more solid, and their expressions. Elizabeth no longer looked sad. Sarah's anger had faded. They were enjoying themselves, enjoying each other's company. The rivalry was still there, but it was different now. Friendly, competitive, but not hostile. The game ended in a stalemate. The ghosts looked at each other, then at Eli. They smiled. For the first time, he heard their voices clearly. Eliphalet Duncan, as Elizabeth and Sarah. "Thank you," they said in unison, and then slowly they began to fade. Eli watched as they disappeared, hand in hand. The air in the room felt lighter, peaceful. He realized then what they had needed, not vengeance or justice, but reconciliation, a chance to move on. As dawn broke, Eli sat in the study, processing what had happened. The house felt different now, lighter, as if a great burden had been lifted. He picked up Prudence's journal again, flipping through the pages, and then he saw it. A passage he'd missed before. His eyes widened as he read. Prudence had known. She'd known about Elizabeth and Sarah, about their rivalry, their regrets. She had tried to help them, but couldn't. Eliphalet Duncan, as Prudence. "Only one of their own blood can set them free," she had written. Eli realized then why he had inherited the house. It wasn't random chance. It was destiny. He dug deeper into the family history, and there it was. The twist he never saw coming. He was descended from both Elizabeth and Sarah. Their bloodlines had intertwined over the centuries, leading to him, Eliphalet Duncan, as Eli. Eli laughed. It was absurd, incredible, and yet it made perfect sense. As he closed the journal, Eli felt a sense of peace wash over him. He had done what generations before him couldn't. He had brought rival ghosts together, helped them find peace. And in doing so, he had found his own place in history, his own ghost story. But unlike the tales of old, this one had a happy ending. Eli smiled. He had a feeling his life in Salem was just beginning. And who knew what other secrets this old house might hold?